guys, but I do have a couple of things for you. Okay.
There we
All
go.
right,
Here we
so
go. That's awesome.
there you go. So this sub sandwich actually has a story behind it. All right. So when I was younger, my family loved hiking, and we go on hikes all the time, and we'd actually bring these sub sandwiches as part of our meal or lunch. And then for me, as a little kid, the hardest part was actually choosing what kind of sub sandwich to bring. And the reason is I felt like, what if I want a PB&J but ended up bringing a ham and cheese sandwich? And so these are the kind of things that tormented me as a kid that caused me to conjure up a brilliant idea. And that was to make a sandwich that was actually 3 sandwiches, right? So I thought ham and mayo, pretty good. That's decent. PBJ, that's another standard one that you can't go without. And an interesting was sunflower peanut butter with lemon curd. So those are the 3 sandwiches I thought of, and I'm like, you know what? This is what I'm going to make my super sandwich out of, and I'm going to bring it on this next hike. Okay, so little kid me thought I was pretty smart. I mean, I was thinking I have 3 options when I go on my next hike, but I have 1 sandwich. And so I'm at home, and I decide, I'm going to go ahead and try to make one of these in preparation. And being the little kid me, I didn't have the dexterity, and maybe I was a little too excited, and it was a mess. It was a literal mess. So I got mayo inside of the peanut butter. The ham was mixed in with some honey, and then the sunflower peanut butter was mixed in with some of the mayo as well. So it was kind of gross, and we obviously threw that away because it was not edible. So luckily, my mom stepped in, helped me make a different sandwich, and I actually recreated that sandwich that you guys are seeing right now, right? So we actually partitioned it so that each section of this sandwich is actually one of those sandwiches. So I know it doesn't look as appetizing right now, but I promise it's very delicious, right? So you got the ham and mayo over here on this side. You got the PB&J in the middle, and then you got the sunflower peanut butter with lemon curd up on top. Okay, so with this awesome sandwich, we embarked on a completely new hike, and I was way pumped about my super sandwich. And it was even better because my mom helped me make it, and it was partitioned into nice, even sub sandwiches, if you will. Okay. So at this point, 10 miles in, just kidding, it probably wasn't 10. I was probably more like a mile because I'm a little kid and get hungry real fast. So take a little snack break, and I think, you know what? I think it's time for a PB&J sub sandwich. So I busted out, and I instantly realized, how am I going to get to my PB&J? I either have to come through this end, or I'm just going to go straight smack dab in the middle and just start eating through the middle and figure out as I go. Of course, being the little kid, not thinking ahead, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just start eating and see what happens. And then as I'm eating, I find the second problem, which is unless I'm checking and opening the bread constantly, I don't know where the PB&J end and the ham and mayo begin. And so I'm paranoid about half the time because I'm worried that some ham is going to sneak into my PB&J sub sandwich. So in the end, I'm sitting there after I've eaten through the PB&J, accidentally ate both of, all 3 actually. And I end up with 2 ends of a sandwich that of course I made my mom carry, right? Because I'm a kid and, I don't know anything about accountability or responsibility yet. But to me, it was a lesser disaster compared to that first sandwich. And it was even more of a less disaster than having to bring a completely wrong sandwich. Now, the next hike, my mom caught on to me. She's like, you know what? I know what you want. You know what you want? You want options, but still have it to be portable. So she shared with me that instead of bringing a whole sub, you can bring 3 different sandwiches, which, mind blown. Who knew that was even a possibility, right? Because for me, sub sandwiches were how they are always done. That's always what we brought on a hike. And so now you have 3 different options without the risk or the mess of those first 2 instances. And so from that day forward, I've always carried with me these 3 exact sandwiches, the PB&J, the mayo and ham, and then the sunflower peanut butter with lemon curd. Okay? So all of this personal story actually has a connection with Docker, and I think you may know where I'm going with this. So let's compare this story to hosting applications and services. right? And let's think of each of these ingredients as a dependency for an application, right? So without the peanut butter library, the PB&J application just falls apart. Or without the ham library, the ham sandwich service is throwing errors all day, right? So with this metaphor, let's take a look at that first example of that first sandwich, that mega sandwich that I made, where I had a mess of a sandwich, which is what many experience when hosting multiple applications on just the same server, no virtualization. It's just everything's in there and it's not very fun, right? But then come along VMs, which is that second iteration of a sandwich where everything is partitioned nice and evenly, but the portability is still kind of an issue. Okay. Now, fast forward a little bit more, and here comes Docker. And Docker packages the applications into neat, lightweight, isolated sandwich instances that are easily repeatable and enjoyable. Okay, so let's run through a couple of those benefits, right? So you don't have to, unlike virtualization, you don't have to carry the whole guest operating system. You only package what you need in order to be able to run the application. And the Docker engine will actually handle the translation between the guest OS and the applications. And that's great because you can move between dev or your local environment to prod a lot easier because you don't have to worry about those configurations or installations or bringing along the right version of the library. And then on top of that, things ship faster because everything's packaged so small, right? So you don't have these large applications that you have to move. And if you change a piece of code over here, it's going to break something over here. So those are some definite benefits to using Docker and containers, right? And you get better availability, better CI/CD, and then just more isolation and less interdependency of those applications. So some use cases that you guys might be thinking of are, microservices. That's a great time to use containers in order to be able to make those services available, very lightweight and highly available. Data processing is another instance in which this is a very good use case for this, where you're bringing in a lot of data, you spin up a lot of Docker containers or instances, process through that, and you're able to spin those back down really fast. But you don't have to worry about injecting in too much. It's already pre-built, and all you have to do is use that image. Okay, so those are a couple of use cases there, and that's kind of the introduction that we have for you today regarding Docker. So let's lead into this a little bit as far as now you're wondering, how do I access this goodness? How do I start making these awesome Docker sandwiches, these Docker package sandwiches? And luckily, AWS does have support for that through their Elastic Container Service, or ECS. And with ECS, you have access to a fully managed container orchestration service. So I know that was quite a bit that we covered, but don't worry, and I won't have to get too much deeper into the weeds because we have Peter McKee with us from Docker, and he's actually going to help us learn a great and easy way to use Docker on AWS using their newly released ECS integration CLI tool. So Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I think that was one of the best Docker overviews and introductions I've heard in a long time, man. That was great. That was great.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit of ECS today. And in kind of in the vein of coming to containers, getting started with containers, understanding what containers are and difference between VMs, and not only that, but trying to learn all the different technologies that go along with it, having to learn Docker itself, Docker files, compose files, and that could be challenging. But then you take a look at, how do I run my containers somewhere else, right? Up in the cloud, whether it's a private cloud, public cloud, or in AWS. And then there's a whole set of technologies you have to use there. So the Docker team, set out to try and simplify that a little bit. We talk about at Docker internally, we talk about the inner loop and the outer loop in the developer experience. And so the inner loop is kind of when you're developing locally, you're writing code, you're testing and debugging, you're building images, whether you're developing inside of an image, inside of a container, or you're just building images locally. And I think there's a real, a lot of times, a lot of blogs out there, a lot of videos, they're great, a lot of great content, but they're so advanced, and a lot of them are really targeted at larger development teams that either have a full-time DevOps organization or a dedicated DevOps person on their team, or they have big operations teams, right, that can help run their containers in production or in stage in other environments. But a lot of people and a lot of teams don't have that, right? That team does everything. And so we kind of took a look at how could we make it a lot easier to run your containers in the cloud without having to become an expert in a lot of other technologies. We're not there yet with our plugin, but we're getting there. We're trying to move down that road, partnering with AWS. They've been highly, involved in this these new features that we're bringing into the CLI. So trying to make it a lot easier to be able to code the cloud from developing code to then being able to run it in the cloud as seamlessly as possible. On a personal note, will we ever get away with, never having to learn about AWS and ECS and VPCs and, all that kind of stuff? No, of course not, right? You still have to have a good understanding of it. But it's also, technology to me is levels of abstraction. And I think great technology allows you to work at the highest level of abstraction that works for you and does what you need, but then also allows you to drop in down the levels of abstraction, right? And those levels shouldn't leak either. So I think Docker did that amazingly when it first came out. Containers were not a new thing. Process isolation. Docker didn't invent that. But what they did is made it super easy to use, right? I remember seeing the first demo that was given at PyConf, I believe. The internet will tell me if I'm wrong. But anyways, at first I didn't get it, right? I did not understand. I was like, well, what did this guy just do, right? I didn't really understand it. And it took me a while to understand VMs and why would I need containers, right? But once you get it, it kind of clicks pretty quickly. It allows you to wrap your sandwiches up nice and neatly and isolate your sandwiches from other, so your mayonnaise doesn't leak, right, Braden? But yeah, okay, cool. So let's jump into the code. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second here. All right. I'm going to do I almost did the usual, Zoom thing. Hey, can you see my screen? But anyways, so the scenario kind of looking at today is just that. Perhaps you work on a smaller team. You're doing a little bit of a POC. You have a new project you're building. And you want to get things up quickly. You want to then be able to show them to, let's say, the product team, your other teammates, maybe a designer's on your team, and you want to be able to share what you've done with them so they can take a look at it and give feedback. So what we're looking at today is a little application. We have a front end and a back end. And it actually might be easier. Let me just pull this up in VS Code. So we have a front end and back end. The front end is written in React, very, very simple application. And I'm going to run it here in a minute, where we can create employees and edit them, create new employees. And then the back end is is a Node.js application. I have some little code that I've written that I use all the time when I do demos and stuff. So everybody out there that goes and clones or includes Ronin stuff, be aware it is not production ready. It's not feature rich. It's but feel free to cut PRs if you're interested. Feature request PRs. If you're interested in it, love some help. But the idea with Ronin is, you can see right here, is to be able to spin up a quick server. Ronin sits on top of Express, and then you can then use that server and say, I want to listen to everything on services WAC M for mocks. There's nothing special about this. It's just your route. And then I have a mocking server that you pass into it. And then you'll see down here at the end, oops, if I don't delete code, there's ability to send an RBAC, which I won't be covering today. So you can layer in top of an RBAC framework to do roles-based access controls. And then this last flag that I wanted to point out is it's an in-memory database. So we're going to use that today for simplicity. So I'm setting that to true. And then we just spin up the server and wait for it. do some relatively nice way to shut down your server. Really, if there's any of you Node.js folks out there, you should use an npm package like Stoppable, I believe, is a really good one. But you want to nicely close your connections. But for now, we're just gonna kill everybody when we shut down. And then a little bit on the front end, just a standard React.js application. What would be interesting to point out here? Not much. Basically, it goes out, it'll show you UI. You can pick what collection you want to look at. It'll give you results. So we're going to take a look at that now. Let me go into the server first. So I'm just in the root of the project. And typically, you would just do node server.js, fire that up. You can see we're listed on port 8080. And then I'll switch over to the front end. And I'm going to use Yarn here because it's React. It will work with NPM, but so let's give it a second to spin up. All right, so here's the application. Super. If you can't notice, I'm definitely not a UI UX person.
It looks great.
Yeah, thank you. I got blue in there, so.
Yeah.
So basically up here, and this is kind of a generic UI too. So you just put in an entity you want to look at. That'll go out. When I hit submit, it was very fast there. So it went out, hit our back end. You can see we got to get into the REST. There's nothing in there right now. And so I'm going to populate a bunch of test data in there. So if you're not familiar with Insomnia, it's basically a REST client that you can use to test your REST API. It's very handy. I know there's others out there, and sometimes it could be a little bit of a war on which one's better, but I've settled on Insomnia. But if there's any newer stuff out there, someone put in the chat that someone's in love with, I'd love to check it out. But okay, so I just did a little post. I sent in about 20 records, and then we'll run a quick get on those just to make sure we're back and running. And look at the server so we can see our post and our get. Now we should be able to come into our UI. And what did I call those? Employees. All right. So the employees, let's run that. Okay, cool. So our app is up and running, front end, back end. What I wanted to kind of point out here, and this will kind of be the theme of my talk today, of what I'm going to be hacking through. But you can see right now I got 3 terminals open already, right? And I'm just all right, so you can get rid of this one, but I got 2 open right now. But let's say this was a little bit more of a complicated application, microservices, for instance, right? You can have 10, 50, 100 microservices running. And you might say, well, I'm not going to use all of them when I'm developing. True, but you will use a handful of them, right? And so if I had to create tabs here in my terminal for each one of those applications, start each one of the services, it gets a little cumbersome and tough, right? You got to remember which tab that services you're looking for to find logs and all that type of stuff. So let's shut this down. And so what Docker does is what Braden was talking about. You can isolate these. You can wrap everything together, package them up together, and then you can run them, and you can run multiple instances of those, and they should be isolated from each other. And you should really think about as these containers as temporary. Right, you can run a container. If it dies, you can spin up another one. You can have multiple containers running, instances of that image running in a container. And if one of them goes down, you just put another one back in. That's the concept there. So let's take a look at some of the some Docker files and how you do that. So again, back here in the code, and we'll just start on the back end. I was going to type this out for y'all, but for the sake of time, I'll just walk down through the code. And I'll go pretty quickly because it's not necessarily an intro today. But so at the top, we have our from statement. That tells us what base image we're going to use. We're going to use Node. And I do want to point out real quick. Let's take a look here. So if you go into Hub, give it a second if my internet plays nice. Let me log in. Okay. So Hub is where we have a collection of repositories. So I'm going to look for the node image. And you can see here, here's node, and it's the official image, downloaded 10 million plus times. But once you click on node and go into the details, when you scroll down, most of our images have this kind of README and kind of explains what you're doing, but you can also go to the tags and see what tags are available. Or you can just kind of scroll down through here. So let's look at Node.js, and we'll see the long-term support is 12.18.3. So when we come back over to Docker, we're looking down at Hub, and we only have 12.18.2, which is fine, just a dot increment off. But you have these different flavors, different builds of the image. And I'm not going to go into it, but if you scroll down some more, you'll see image variants. And this explains what each one of those tags at the above, how they were built and what's included in them, and a little bit of guidance on how you should use them. Most images on Hub have this. So Hub is a great place to go find your images, find official images, seek out the version you want. My recommendation when you're first starting out building your images, don't worry about image size. Just get your application running in a container, right? Build your image correctly and get that running. Then you can look at slimming it down, right? That shouldn't be the first thing you want to do. Don't optimize prematurely. So anyway, so I just picked the 12.18.2, not the slim or anything like that. And then we set up our working directory. What a working directory is, the commands that come after your working directory will be executed within that working directory. And then I'm going to copy a couple files in the package.json. I won't go too deep in the node in case there's others that are not node developers. But it's a lot of other languages have these same kind of concepts. Package.json just tells you what packages you're going to use for this application. And then the lock file will lock on to a version. So what we're doing here is copying the package.json, the package-lock.json locally on my file system. I'm going to copy that into the image, into app package.json and app package lock. And then I'm going to run npm CI. We could run install or different commands here. For our purposes here, I'm going to run CI. What CI does is basically the same thing as install, but it looks for a package lock. And then I forget what Yarn's lock file is, but you have to have a lock file to tell you exactly what versions to grab. If it doesn't have that, npm will fail. So I like to use that a lot in my images. It's really you should really use that a lot in your CI/CD. It does a clean install. And then down here in line 9, I'm going to copy everything that's in the backend directory into the image. And I just want to note here real quick that we have this docker.docker.ignore file, and that works just like the gitignore file. So if you look at gitignore, this won't be included in your repo. The docker ignore does the same thing. So you see I'm excluding node_modules. We don't want, big, huge image. You will see if you're building your image, you forget a .docker ignore file, your image size will be really big. And you'll also see, I'll point it out when I build the image, everything is sent to the engine, and you could have running Node, depending on how many modules you have included in your project, you could have gigs being sent. So anyways, make sure you always put a docker ignore file. Okay, so we're going to copy everything. We're going to ignore our node modules, and then we're going to give it a simple command and just say node run server.js. So let's go ahead and build that real quick. Let's see. In the back end. So I'm just going to do a Docker build. If I could type, I'm going to give it a tag, and I'm going to call it backend. And then I'm going to give it a dot. This is where you give it the context of where you want to build, where you want the CLI to work in. And so I give it a dot. And since my Docker file is named under uppercase Docker file, that's the default name for your Docker file. So it'll look in your context for that file. Let's go ahead and run that. So it'll take a minute.
So actually, while it's running, so we're about 30 minutes in. So for all those just tuning into the show, this is Howdy Partner. This is the show where we like to highlight some of our partners are doing some really cool things in the cloud. And today with us, we have Peter from Docker, who is highlighting the new Docker CLI integration with ECS. So if this is your first time tuning the show, make sure to like and subscribe.
Awesome. Okay, so we just built our image. Take a look at it. So we got our back end. So there's our image we just built. Let's run it. So we're going to Docker run. I'm going to give it a it-rm-d-p 8080.
And you got all these memorized, don't you?
And yeah, it becomes a little bit of muscle memory, right? Let's call it back end and back end. And yeah, so real quick, you get an interactive terminal. -rm will remove the image when you stop it. If not, you have to remove it manually. D runs it in the background. -p publishes your ports. I always call it, if you hear me call it expose, it's probably not technically, I might get beat up again on Twitter, but that's how I think of it. But I think it stands for publish. And the syntax there is you're saying, what host port do I want to map to a port inside of my container? And then name self-explanatory. And I probably messed that up, but let's run it. Okay, cool. And so that shoots you back the SHA of the container. So real quick, a difference between an image and a container, because I use them sometimes interchangeably, which isn't correct. But we'll talk about containers, we'll talk about images. So an image is what you produce from a Docker file. And if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, you can think of it as your class. And then your container is an instance of that image running, where it's isolated and all that good stuff, but it's your actual image running. And in the object-oriented world, so you have your class, and then when at runtime, you create instances of that class. And same kind of thing here with Docker. You could create, you have one image, and then you can create multiple instances of those. You can have multiple containers running. So forgive me in advance. I give you permission to beat me up on Twitter if I use them interchangeably, because sometimes I do. Okay, so we should be up and running. So let's check. Let's do a Docker PS real quick. We're running. Let's hit it. Let's hit it in the browser. Local host, and we'll go 8080. We'll hit users. Okay, there we go. We shouldn't have gotten anything back. Cool. All right. So we're up and running with the back end with our container. So let's look at the front end real quick, and I'll go a little faster here in the front end. We also have a Docker file there. Same thing, but you'll notice something a little bit different here. I'm doing an as build. And so with React, since React is a client-side framework, right? So this is going to run in the browser. And the JavaScript is not going to get processed on the server. And so ahead of time, we kind of have this build step where we take all of our JavaScript, we minify it, and package it all into a packet, let's call it. And then all we do is have a web server that sits on front of that and just serves that up. And so I want to do a multi-stage build so I can make my image as small as possible. And I know earlier I said don't over-optimize, but I wanted to show this because it's very common in React. If you're a front-end developer and you say, how am I going to use Docker, right? Or how do I serve up my JavaScript and CSS if React doesn't have a web server? And then you got to look at Nginx and that type of stuff. So I want to give a quick example of how to do that. So here, what we're doing is a multi-stage build. So I'm going to label. So this is the same as the other Docker file. Using the node official image 12.18.2, but I'm going to tag it. I'm going to name this image as build. And then Docker's going to, the engine's going to keep going down. And here I have a build argument. And I'll explain a little bit more about this in a second. Right now, just know that it's arguments that you can send into Docker when you build images, and it'll substitute those in and out, and actually makes an environment variable out of them. Okay, so we're setting our working directory as we just did in the backend Docker file, and then again, since we're using JavaScript and we build things with this package JSON, so we're going to copy those into our image, copy in the log file so we get the exact versions that we want, And then down here, we're going to run a yarn install, which is the same thing as npm install. Not the same concept. And then we're going to copy all of our source in. And then we're going to do this extra step here. This is our JavaScript build. So we're telling Yarn, go ahead and build. That's not exactly tech. What Yarn does is it looks at build and goes, okay, let me look in your package JSON, and for this script section, and you'll see here we have build. And what that's going to do is run this React scripts and pass it in build. And React scripts comes from the Create React App starter template package, which is really great to get started to build something really fast. When you want to go a little more, make some modifications, you can eject out of there, which will actually include these scripts, and you can configure it a little bit more to your liking. But for now, it works just fine for us. So what this build step does is basically takes all your JavaScript, minifies it, packages it all up, puts it in the right order, and then we'll put it into a build directory. And so let's do that right now. So let me go into front end. So I'm just going to do a yarn build. And while that's running, I'll jump back. So let's close that down. So we're going to build that. It's going to package everything up. It's going to put it into a build directory. I'll show you that in a minute. And then down here, we have another image that we're going to build. And we're not labeling this. We're not saying as anything. We're using Nginx. I'm not giving it a tag. I'm just using the latest. Again, for your production images, you should really pin to a certain image. And pinning, I mean put a certain version in there or put a specific tag so you always know I'm using this image, this base image. And you want to ensure that nothing gets changed underneath you. I don't know how many times I pulled out my hair, not only with Docker, but including NPM packages and just including libraries that versions got ticked, and I was just using the latest and something broke. It's a nightmare to try and figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
You pull your hair out for hours, right? And then, so, okay, we're setting up Nginx as our base image. And then we're going to copy in a config file, and I'll show you what I'm doing in the config file in a second. Basically, reverse proxy for our API. And then this last command here, same as above. The copy command is the same, but we have this little flag that says from. So what that does, it says from build. And if I scroll back up, instead of copying what's local on my machine, as we did here in line 12, I'm going to copy from this image that we built above called build. And so it's going to look inside of that image into the app build directory, and it's going to copy everything from in there and it's going to put it into user share Nginx HTML. And that way, the only thing that's in our resulting image is the compiled, do my air quotes there in case someone doesn't see me, compiled JavaScript. So it's only the JavaScript you're going to use. It's minified. It should be as small as possible. And then we just have the Nginx sitting on top of that. And what Nginx is going to do, if I look at my Nginx folder, this is just a config file. I am not an Nginx expert by any means. There's probably a better way to do this. And your Nginx comp files can get very complicated. But basically, what this is doing, and listen on port 80, it's going to take everything that's requested and return back in this same exact directory I showed you, user share Nginx HTML that's in our Docker file. All right, so that'll be all of our index.html, everything that was produced from the build. Let me show you that real quick. So here's what was produced in the build. And we have an HTML file. You can't see it here. I think, So these are the compiled JavaScript. So that gets this index.html is produced by React build scripts, and it puts the links into them. You'll see they're all static and JS in here. So what we're going to do is basically this is getting done. That same step I just did on the command line is getting done at the top of this Docker file, right? So it's going to do a yarn install, copy everything in, then does a build and puts it into a build directory. And then here's where we copy it into our Nginx. And then this image is gone. We don't need it. Yeah, and then we're not putting any command in here. I'm just going to use the command that comes with the base Nginx, and that'll fire up Nginx for us. And it'll read in that config file, and it'll do all the magic. So let's build. I said I was going to go fast on that, didn't I? That wasn't very fast, sorry. Let's do fast enough, all right. Let's call this front end. And I'm going to build right here in our local directory. Set the context there. This might take a little bit depending on how my internet is running. Hopefully my son isn't playing whatever they play nowadays. What's it? Are you guys
Pac-Man or Tetris? Is that what the game is called?
Yeah,
Frogger,
something like that.
I think that's what's called.
I wish Frogger was one of my favorite games.
Oh,
that and did you ever play Dig Dug?
oh my gosh,
Oh
yes.
yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a classic. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of my. I don't know how many quarters I wasted at the mall on Dig Dug. Yeah. All right, here we go. Come on. So what we're gonna do in a minute, as soon as this finishes, then I'll start up this the front end, and then we'll make sure our front end's talking to our back end. That done there is just the yarn install. Come on, I should have gave my. There we go. So you'll see right here, step 8 of 11. This build is the exact same thing as doing on the command line. It's creating our optimized production build, and there we go. Okay, cool. And so you'll see it. Here's the output, the files that it created. All right. So let's run this. We'll go Docker run. I'll just cheat a little. Probably have it here somewhere. Okay. So we're gonna expose or publish port 3000 and map that inside the container port 80. Nginx is running on port 80, and yeah, pretty basic. Okay. So now we should have 2 images running. Got our front end, back end. Let's go ahead and test this real quick. Let's kill that. Okay. It probably doesn't translate well onto the Twitch, but it's refreshing. Let's run. Uh-oh. Looks like we got an error. So it's just loading away. So let me do that again. Let me pull this over. Okay, so we can see our error as we run here. Let's do widgets. Okay, cool. So this is looking for localhost 3000 services widgets. Huh. And then we get this bad gateway. So let's look at let's do a Docker logs. I'm gonna do a -f. I'm gonna do a front end. Okay. So you'll see what is happening if I can find it. So connection refused while trying to go upstream. And you'll see this. So the upstream is this 2017, right? So this is not the IP that our backend container is running on. So we have a problem. So if we look at the code real quick. If you look at the front end, you'll see in our services, we make a REST call, and we're using this config the host, right? So services, config.services.host. I'm importing config from config in here, and I'm using this environment variable. This is a special environment variable, or it's prefixed with a prefix that React understands. And I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Since React doesn't run on the server, it doesn't have a chance to process these environment variables. So we need to pass this in at build time. So I wanted to show how you do build arguments. So that's what we're doing here. So we have a default build argument. We're setting the default value to WAC services WAC M. And that's why we see, since I didn't explicitly tell it what host, it just uses the host that you're making the call from. So that's why we use that's why it sent it from localhost 3000, or it's looking for localhost 3000. And if obviously it's not running there. So actually it is, and then when it forwards it in, it's getting to the wrong place. So what we want to do when couple ways we can solve this. We could put each of our we could take out the reverse proxy and just go directly from the client, the browser, into our API. We can put both of our containers on the same network and do some looking up. And we're going to do that in the compose file. But for now, we do HTTP. Actually, I'm going to, looking at the time here, I'm going to jump ahead. So what I could do is put HTTP, localhost, make sure, pretend that's spelled right, and then 8080. And that will bypass Nginx and go directly to it. But anyway, so you see we have some problems where we're building independent images and then running them kind of in isolated by themselves. We're having some problems with isolation. Well, surprise, surprise, we have a solution for that in Compose. So this is where Compose starts to come into play. And Compose allows you to bring different services together, start them together. You could send parameters to them, which is great. You just saw me just type out a bunch of switches on the command line. It can get exhausting trying to remember everything you need to pass in. You start doing backslashes and new lines and all kinds of stuff. But with Compose, we can define everything in one file for application. And again, just imagine we only have one backend here, but let's say it was a multi-service backend, and you can have 10 of these. Maybe you have an authorization service, you have a service for just employees, then you have a service for locations and all those benefits and all kinds of stuff, right? And you would have to start up each one of those to be able to, because they're interdependent. If you look at a microservices architecture diagram, it becomes this ball of interdependent APIs, right? And so spinning those all up individually can be time consuming and error prone. So we use a compose file. And so in this compose file, I'm setting up my services, and I have two of them. I have a front end and a back end. We'll start with the front end. So I tell it what image name I want to give it. So this is my hub ID, my Docker ID, and that kind of namespace is my images on hub. And then we're going to call it employee front end. And then I tell Compose where to build, what context to use. So here's the front end. That's where my Docker file is. And then here I'm passing in the build argument. And I'm going to tell it, go ahead, use services for this scenario. And then I'm going to map, then I'm going to expose my ports, publish my ports. And then same thing down here at the bottom, pretty straightforward. Here's the name of my image, what build context I want to use, and what ports to expose. And so let's make sure I didn't break anything in here. Okay, cool. So let's jump over here. And so I'm just writing the root of my project, and you can see my back end and front end. There's where my Docker Compose file is. So let's do a Docker Compose, and I'm going to build. So this will take a minute again. It's going to do the same build. It's using the same Docker files we looked at, and it's going to build both of those. And then once it builds, I'm going to be able to push my images up at the hub, and then I'm going to run my application locally using one command, which makes it a whole lot easier. While that's running, I want to show you. Let me show you how Docker build. So if you wanted to pass in a build arg into build, you do Docker build -t. We'll give it a name is front end, and then you give it -- build arg. And let's see. Well, that's risky. I was just going to paste something in there. Let me just copy it. Go like this. And then this is where we can do HTTP localhost 8080 services M, I believe. And then we give it a dot. I won't run it while this other build is running. But that'll set your build argument. That'll pass in this value into Docker when you're being built. And so if we look, so no longer will this build argument inside of your Docker file be equal to WAC services. It becomes this, right? The localhost dependent. And you can have multiple of these, and then you can also interpolate strings in there and stuff like that.
So Peter, quick question
Yes.
there. So that typically passing in that local host, essentially that environment thing, has to be done after the fact, after it's been built.
No, you do it before it's built.
Okay.
So you pass. There's two things you can do. You can have environment variables, and then you can have build args. And build args are a way that you could pass in arguments into your build, and they actually become environment variables in your image.
I see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then a lot of times what I use environment variables is when I'm running my image, and I can pass in environment variables. The way I used to do it when I first came to Docker way back when is we had these config files, and we had them separated by environment. So you'd have like a dev, a stage, and a prod in this big JSON file. And we'd build one image and include that config in, and then at runtime we'd pass in an environment variable that was environment actually spelled out. And then we'd set it either to dev or to stage or to prod. And the problem with that is you have a config file inside of your container, inside your image that is you can see at runtime, and you can. So if you have production secrets and keys in there, it's no bueno. Right? It's
Right.
not good. And so you could pass in environment variables with connection strings and some secrets, and then you can also use secrets in whatever kind of orchestrator you're using. That I would recommend that above using environment variables for obvious reasons, right? But yeah, so that's kind of the two ways. You have build arguments that are used during the build, and then environment variables when you're running, basically.
Got it.
That's
Thank you.
how I think about it. Yep. Okay, so we built. It's clear. Go Docker images. If I could spell. Now you see of these images with the repo name in front of it, and then here's our other front end and back end. So to run it local, I just do a Docker compose up. Uh-oh, I bet you I have something running. Yes, I do. Well, let me show the error before I just jump around doing stuff. So we got an error, and it's telling us port 8080 is already bound. It's already allocated. So over here, and we'll do a Docker PS. And you can see that's these bottom two. So I already have 8080 bound. So let's stop that. We'll stop our back end, and then we'll stop our front end. All right, Docker. Okay, and let's do a Docker compose down. Take that one image down. Okay, cool. So let me run that again. This is fun seeing me fumble around on the keyboard. Let me clear screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what that did is it looked at the compose file. Again, I didn't tell it the name of the compose file, but by convention, it looks in the current directory you're at and looks for docker-compose.yaml. And there we go. So it's spin up our front end, it's got our back end. Let's test. Let's see if. So we're running on port 80. Okay, so we're up. Let's put widgets in there. And nice, we got a 200. And you can see we're going straight to localhost, no ports or anything. Let's look at our logs. And you can see the back end is getting requests. So our Nginx reverse proxy is working. So let's just one more prove out that theory. So I'm going to push, about 20 records into the employees, and then we'll just go into the app. And there they are. Cool. So just quickly recap what I did there. Is instead of alt tabbing or command 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, and going into each terminal, doing the long Docker run command I had to type in, for my front end, and then each one of my back end services, I just dropped into the root where my Docker compose file was, and I just where everything is already defined, and I just did a Docker dash compose up, and I'm up and running. So it makes it super easy to spin up multiple containers. There's a ton more things you can do with compose by setting up volumes and networks and stuff like that. So yeah, so now we're at the point, okay, so I've developed some features, I got everything running, I want to share this out, right? Typically what you would do, or not necessarily typically, but one way I see a lot of people doing, and believe me, I used to do this all the time, and I still do, don't tell anybody, is to spin up a nice little EC2 instance, right? So you come in here. I did this earlier because I knew it takes a little while, and I'm not knocking on AWS. It's just the way it is, right? It's EC2 instances are awesome, but so I spun up an instance earlier. I installed Docker on it, I put Docker Compose on it, and now I have nice little VM running in the cloud. But the problem is now I can't do anything from my local machine, so I have to SSH into it, right? And now I'm on SSH'd into that machine, and you'd think, okay, well, I'll just do a Docker Compose, up, the same thing I did locally. Well, of course, that Docker Compose file is not there. So now what I see a lot of people doing is installing Git, pulling the branch down, pulling the actual code down, doing a Docker Compose up there, right? Building images on your machine that you want to run. And then you get into environment variables, build arguments you want to use when you're running in a production, or let's say this is a stage environment, right? That environment's different than I'm running local, and it just becomes very tedious. I've done this for a long time. I won't do it, hand code it out here, but you would have to do, create your Docker Compose file. Again, if I could type, this is the hardest part of giving demos, is typing in front of people. Right, and you would write out your services, and the second hardest thing is remembering how to use the Vim. But oh boy, let's see. Oh, no!
Somebody help him quit.
Quick.
Did I just write it out? Remove Docker file. All right. Anyways, yeah, so now we have to create our compose file up there. I'd either have to, secure copy it up. Do I have the right one? Becomes a nightmare, right? So let's exit out here. And now we're coming to the really cool stuff. So Docker's new integration with ECS is we do it through context. So what a Docker context is so basically you can think of a context as an environment that's able to run containers. Whether that be ECS, in the future EKS, or locally on your machine. So you can see I just did a Docker context ls, so listing out my contexts. I have this default, and you'll notice the star beside it. So I'm pointing to my local. This is the one that's active right now. You see it's type Moby, and then this tells me it's my current Docker host base configuration. I also have an ECS, but let me remove that. Let's do context, remove ECS, because I don't want to walk through that. So let's create another context and point that into my AWS account. So I do a Docker ECS, and we have this nice little command called setup that kind of will walk through the steps of doing it. So I'll do a Docker ECS setup, and I'm just going to leave the default name ECS. Now, if I had profile set up in my AWS config file locally, they would show up there, so you could select one of those. I'm going to do a new profile and just call it my profile. We'll do US East 2, and I'm going to enter credentials, but I'm going to move it over here. You guys can't see that, right?
No, you're safe.
No, you're good.
I trust you guys.
And in the meantime, this is a great time to welcome anyone that's joined midstream here. We have Peter McKee with us from Docker, who's just walked us through how to do the basics of Docker. And now we're at the point where he's sharing with us how do we integrate Docker into AWS. And Docker has recently released a CLI integration tool to be able to make it a little bit easier to use Docker inside of AWS. So that's what we're working on right now with Peter.
Awesome. Okay, so I just put in my credentials, and now we have an ECS context. Sorry, my screen is wrapping there, but yeah. So, and you can see it's not the default yet. So let's switch over to use that. So we do a Docker context, use, and then ECS. Now, if I do an LS again, you can see the star moved from default down to ECS. So now we're pointing at ECS. And let me clear. And now it is as simple as, remember our compose file? So we had a Docker compose. I wanted to come back and explain this right here. So the X- are extensions to the compose specification. And for each cloud, there'll be things that'll get added into the compose spec. So you can use the same compose file with different clouds. But I'm sure you only use AWS since you're on this channel, which would be great. So, so to be able to pull images from Hub, I need to give it credentials to be able to go out to Hub. So I did that earlier. Now you can go into ECS. We can go into the secrets manager, right? And I have this Hub access, and I won't show you my secret, but right, I can come in here and create it, those type of things. But the Docker team wanted to make it super simple, so they added it into the integration. So if you just do a Docker ECS secret ls, and you can see here's the one I created earlier. But if you want to create one, you do a create. Let's call it my infamous foobar, and I think you do. Well, we'll see. We'll call them foo, and then we'll give them a password as pass. And so now we have a Docker ECS secret ls. Now we have two of them. You'll see that foobar. Let's jump back into our secrets. There you see. Now we have two up there, right? So I created the one earlier with my real credentials. And then you include that in here underneath this pool credentials. And AWS will use the credentials you add into your secret to go out the hub to be able to pull your images down. Cool. So again, this compose file is exactly the same. And now we just do a Docker ECS compose. Let me make sure I pushed my images. Let me do a Docker compose push. Oh, I have to go back to Docker. Sorry. So this is interesting. You'll see this a lot, right? So not all the capabilities have been recreated in our context. So the ECS context right now doesn't support push, right? So that's what that error is saying, hey, the platform targeted in your current context doesn't support this. So we got to switch back to use ECS default.
Oh, new word there, contact. No, you're totally right, Peter. It's totally hard to type in front of people.
No, it gives me street cred. I don't think I know too many developers that can spell. And if they can, don't trust them. Just kidding. Totally kidding out there. Totally kidding. I just say that to make myself feel better. All right, so context. See? LS. So we're pointing back at the default. So I'm going to do a docker-compose, and I'm going to push. Make sure we get those nice new images we built earlier pushed up in the hub. Come on, Wi-Fi, play nice. And done. All right, awesome. Now let's run Docker ECS compose, and I'm going to do an up. Docker context. There again, it's saying, hey, we don't know what the heck you're talking about. Use ECS. Now let's do it. Now those little warnings you're getting right there is, don't worry about this for now. So you'll see. So it's going out It's creating the default networks, creating our target groups, and you'll see this kind of go through. It'll take a couple minutes, but let's jump over into the console. And let's take a look at CS. So you can see here the employees clusters being set up. And the reason it's named employees, if we come back to my folder, just like Compose, when you run docker-compose, your services are named after the folder you're in, the directory you're in, and then the name of your service is the default naming convention. So we're doing the same thing here. You can also do, if you want to do a Docker ECS compose, let's do an H. And, it is, let me show the up command. And I'll type out help. What? Oh, maybe I lied. You're able to give it a project name, so it just doesn't use front end anymore. I'm sorry, it doesn't use employees. You can actually name it, but maybe that's not there right now. Anyways, okay, so we can watch this as it's working and see things that are pending. You can see things that have completed.
So a quick question there, Peter, is that if you go back to your CLI to kind of look at those statuses, yeah, perfect. So it's provisioning or it's creating all these different things, connecting it all up. If you were to try to do this manually, how much time would it take?
Oh, man. Yeah. Me? Forever. People that are really good at this forever. Yeah, so I want to, while that's going, why don't I show you this now? So let me go up so we'll do a Docker ECS compose, and I forget what it is, convert. So if you do a convert, you get the cloud formation.
Great.
That's really cool.
So,
that is awesome.
Yeah, so we'll pipe this into just FTX, and then let's open that up. So here's your cloud formation, and it's at, let's see, how many lines? So 622 lines.
And
Wow.
so, Peter, so this basically converts the compose file into CloudFormation, right, in the background? That's basically what's happening?
Yeah, if you look at, here's another good, so that's still running. If you look at the GitHub and Docker, there it was, ECS plugin. Gives you a little bit of the architecture here. So you see the compose file model does all this kind of validation, then you have this convert step, converts it into a template. So yeah. So it's using CloudFormation underneath the hood. Yeah. I think I like that, right? I was talking about levels of abstraction, right? So I could run this command, produce my cloud formation, and then edit it, and then run that formation, right? If I needed to do one little off, something a little more complex, or not, right? I can go up and down that level of abstraction as much as I need to. For someone who is new to AWS, wants to run their containers in the cloud, you just do an ECS compose up, and it'll produce everything for you.
That's amazing. Like you kind of said in the beginning, not everyone has like these huge DevOps teams. So this really does save a lot of time for more of the small to medium-sized DevOps groups or developer groups.
Yeah, 100%. I'm super excited about it. And so
plus it's only in beta, so I can only imagine some of the other stuff that's gonna come out, as the tool builds out. So definitely super exciting stuff.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I'll take that. Nice tee up there. We didn't plan this ahead of time, but I'll show you the roadmap.
Great.
There you go.
Roadmap. So if you go into GitHub, into our roadmap, get rid of this, and please come here if you have feature requests, problems, bugs, issues. Our engineering team is on here a lot. Our product team is on. This is Ben right here. He's he senior product manager at our principal product manager with us. Awesome guy. Watches this a lot. So if you come into projects, there it is, and click on the roadmap, you get this nice Kanban.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but if you're looking at things that are, I was just looking at this yesterday, I think. So we got ECS support for EC2, ECS service scaling. EKS is probably in here too, I know. So the biggest thing is if you want something, come in here, and then if you find it, make sure you hit the plus, upvote it, so to speak. So we look at one of these. Don't go to $2. Let's go into issues, easier this way. Let's see, EKS. So if you want GKS, don't go there. Come into this one. I'm not signed in, but you can thumbs up it, right? Yeah, please come in here. You can see that Alex is on our team at Docker. So people are in here from the Docker engineering. Alex is on the infra team. Wicked smart guy. But yeah, please interact with us on here. Give us your feature requests. Upvote, downvote, join the discussion. This is our roadmap, right? So if you see Ben, I think that last issue we had, he created that issue. So the product team uses this. There's no secret shadow roadmap behind the scenes. There is stuff that we do internally, right? That we don't want to make public before contracts and those type of things. But generally speaking, all of our roadmap is public. Okay, so that's completed. So another really cool thing is you can do a Docker ECS compose PS. So just like you can do a Docker PS and see your images running, you can do a PS. This is a load balancer. Wow, it's gonna wrap. All right, so let's grab that. And let's make a new tab. Come in here. Usually takes a minute to spin up the first time. Well, that's spinning. Let's see if we can. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so cool. That's up and running. So there we're at, right? Just took my application. I know everybody's blown away out there in the internet verse. But I basically did a Docker ECS compose up, right? Took my compose file. Now I'm running an ECS behind a load balancer, behind a cloud map, logging, VPCs, everything. So we can also do a compose. Let's do PS. Oh no, come on. Let's test the app while that's running. Usually that runs a lot faster. Let's create a record up there. So we'll call it. So if you remember earlier, we were looking at where things were getting pointed to and ports and all that good stuff. And you'll see here, I'm not, there's no ports here. The reverse proxy is running. We got it saved back to us. All right, let's see. Okay, cool. What I wanted to show was Docker ECS compose logs. You got to spell compose, right? Again. So there we go. There's our logs. Just like we saw running locally, you can see our services are prepended. Is that right? You know what I'm talking about. Anyways, you can see our backend is being hit, right? That was our post. There's our get. You can see the front end. All of our Nginx logs are there. Takes a second for it to come up. What'd I do? Foo bar? Was it just foo? No, it was in widgets. All right, both of you failed. You weren't paying attention. Or you were like, what is he talking about? Anyways, you can see the logs being dumped out. Super cool. And ECS compose, and let me do a help. So we looked at the up. We'll look at down here in a second. Then we looked at PS. Then we looked at logs, and then I showed convert. Oh, here it is. Earlier, couldn't find it. Sorry. I think I did ECS compose up, and I was looking for the project name. But you could pass in a project name, and so instead of having it called employees, you can name it whatever you like. So yeah, before I tear it down though, I wanted to jump over and poke around a little bit in ECS just to show you guys what was made, what was built. So if we go to formation, not lake formation, formation. So you can see our stack. And then you could come in here and see all the resources that were created. Oh man, it might be a little hard for people online to see, but you can easily come down and see everything that's created for you. Your task definitions, execution IAM rules, cloud map, your cluster.
So wow, they really do make it easy, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that was sarcastic or not.
No, it's 100%. Like that is like all those things. You imagine having to click through all that, or even try to build the cloud formation. It's nice to be able to just make the compose thing and then use the CLI tool and boom, it's going for you.
Yeah. I agree. It's super slick, right? And it's just like it sounds like I'm keep repeating myself, but it's just the beginning, right? It's just starting out. More features are coming. I mean, right now it's. I mean, I could use this right now, which I do. But so yeah, you see here it is our cluster's been created. We have our services. If you go into the services, you can see your tasks. If we go into a task, we can see the images being pulled from Hub. You can also pull from ECR, not a problem. But the integration one made it just very simple, right? We know people are pushing Hub and ECR, right? If we only supported ECR, which was a no-brainer, right? It was like you have to support a Hub, right? People are pushing their images there. Yeah, what else can I show in there? I could show you map, cloud map. So service discovery. So creates a namespace for you. Create your services, the front end and back end. You can see these pointing to the instances, and you'll see it's the cluster name, service name, task definition. Yeah, I think that's it. That was really a question show.
Yeah, I can question for you in the chat. So Delboy GG is asking, for those who don't have full control over an account, can we use pre-existing VPCs and roles through role boundaries when using this tool?
I don't think 100% right now, but you will be able in the future for sure.
Okay, sounds good.
You can always, if you're adventurous too, spit out the cloud formation and tweak that a bit.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
And for folks just tuning in, we have Peter from Docker showcasing the new ECS integration with Docker. So if you have questions for him, please feel free to ask away.
Perfect.
And yeah,
see here regarding that roadmap there. I mean, you talked about how they're constantly on there. Is there anything that you're quite excited about that you're really excited for them to be able to push out anytime soon?
I'm super excited about Sneak. Okay. I know that's Sneak, which is our image scanning. So we partner with a company called Sneak. They provide image scanning. It's going to be built right into your, I think I talked earlier about your inner loop, right, where you're developing. You know how most engineers are. Us, you wait to the last minute to do all your security stuff, right? Scanning all your images, looking for vulnerabilities. It's just a real pain to do it manually, to try and watch in the industry. There's security professionals that that's their full-time job, right? Well, our Sneak integration will scan your images, give you vulnerabilities and give you pinpoint fixes, right? So I'm super excited about that, but I'm excited about EKS. I'm excited about scaling.
It's gonna be huge.
EKS will be huge. ECS scaling's huge, right? So even if you're not going to EKS, right, which a lot of people don't necessarily need Kubernetes, right? You can stay in ECS. The more features that are coming with ECS, you'll be able to scale your applications, do more. We have a load balancer. I don't think I've showed it there, but being able to do DNS entries and all that, right? Being able to spin your application up, very simple. I haven't looked down. This changes a lot in the writing the code, or actually the backlog. I'm sorry, the investigating the backlog changes a lot. But the two main is I'm really excited for this one right here, this service scaling.
Cool.
I think I missed the other one. ARM support is coming, GPU support, those are exciting. ARM support's going to be really cool. And EKS is going to be, I won't say game changer, but Peter McKee said it'll be a game changer. I could see the, but I mean, and I'm going to brag on the engineering team a little bit, right? I mean, they work really hard on this, and I just saw some demos last week of the UX is evolving. It's going to be even tighter UX, right? Where the idea is to really make the Docker commands that you're used to, that you've worked with forever, that you use locally, and be able to switch your context and be able to use those same commands with AWS. There'll be some changes here and there. There'll be extensions to the compose, but seamless as possible, right? So the UX, the Docker CLI experience feels the same, and it doesn't feel like if you're pointing to a different context that you're sure you type Docker first, but it feels like a full different CLI, right? We want that experience to stay the same.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, looks like we have another question. So how would Docker utilize your DynamoDB to retrieve data in a Docker image?
Wait, what? How would a Docker?
Yeah,
say that
I
again?
kind of had to think about that too. So the question from Nami Kuro is, how would Docker utilize your DynamoDB to retrieve data in a Docker image?
So I'm not sure what he's trying to do. So he wants to run a container. She wants to run a container. Go ahead.
Yeah, feel free
Are you
to
trying to containerize DynamoDB? Like maybe we need a little more explanation there.
Yeah. I don't think you can containerize DynamoDB, right? Because it's your guy's service, right?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
Maybe he's asking to how to access DynamoDB from a container. But you would just use the AWS APIs, right, in your code, and just like any other database call out to in the Dynamo, right, to collect your data. But so I'm not a big fan of containerizing your databases. I like to use databases as a service, right? It just removes all that management headache. And so running your containers, and you want your containers to go, if they die, they die, right? And doing that in a fault-tolerant way with databases can be tricky. And again, it depends on your team, right? I think all good engineering answers start with it depends. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? It depends on the expertise on your team, those type of things, right? So it's certainly possible to run a database in a orchestrated environment, container environment. Locally, I run my databases all locally, right, in containers. So maybe it gives more info on what they're looking for.
Nice.
Cool. Sounds good.
Oh, but also too, I want to note, yeah. So here's the repo for the ECS plugin. You can go fork it, take a look at what's being built. There's a little sample app in the example that has a little Flask and Redis called Timestamper, but you should be able to kind of walk down through here and recreate this. Yeah, I'm planning on a blog post that more a tutorial, I should say, but it'll be on our blog. Kind of walk you through just what I did. You can also find some explanations in our docs. Best would be just search, the Google machine, or search the DuckDuckGo. I'm gonna start saying DuckDuckGo. I've switched. You guys saw me earlier on the Brave browser, and I started using DuckDuckGo. Yeah, I've been enjoying it. All right.
So actually, on that note, Peter, for folks that want more updates and just want to follow kind of what you're doing in the space, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Twitter. It's probably the best place to find me at P McKee, just my first initial last name. That's probably the best place to find me. Also in our community Slack channel. You can join it. It's free. We have a link. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. Docker community, Slack community. So right here, just click on the join Slack. Come into our Slack channel. You'll find me in there. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm always on Slack or on Twitter. Twitter sometimes gets a little hard. Things get lost in the Twitterverse, but it's a good place to ping me. And then if we need this chat more, I'd love to. Slack is a good place to jump in. A lot of great people in there. We have our captains are in the Slack channel. They're awesome. They answer a lot of questions. And then also we have a bunch of meetups. Everything's virtual right now, but the Docker community is pretty passionate, right? And a lot of great content out there from our community. So join a local meetup and go virtual until the world calms down a little bit. We're planning on doing some more virtual meetups for Docker official virtual meetups. Just planning and timing. The team is a little bit small right now, so it's usually me. But we want to do another getting started 101 tutorial. One of our captains was gracious enough to do it, I think last month, which was great. It's a great tutorial if you're just new to Docker. We have a pretty simple getting started, but this is more kind of in depth, and we touch a lot of things in Docker. So volumes, building images, some best practices, and then the idea is you could take that and try to start applying it to your language and frameworks. But yeah, those are the two places probably connecting with me the best.
Great. Sounds good.
Awesome.
So other than that, if we don't have any other questions for Peter, Braden, we always end the show in a very peculiar way. If you'd like to explain to Peter how we like to end the show.
Yeah, that's right. We have 2 or 3 phrases, depending on if we can remember them, that we usually sign off with. To be honest, Andrew, I can't remember all of them right now at the moment. I think it's come back
giddy up. Right.
What's the other one here?
I think it's giddy up, right?
Giddy up.
Giddy up.
I'll come back now. Giddy up. Yep. Here we go.
Yes.
AM, the happy trails. There we go. Thank you for the
happy
help.
Trails,
there.
that's what it was.
So those are the 3 sign-off phrases. Which do you prefer, Peter?
Can I add one? Is that legal?
Yeah. Oh, that absolutely.
I don't know if it fits, but I don't know where I got this, but I think I used to be in the Coast Guard many years ago, and I had a cowboy that I worked with who's from Minnesota. He would always say to us, "Giddy up, for tonight we ride." I'm like, wonderful. I don't know what that means.
That's a solid one.
It's cowboyish, and it's yeah.
We might need to add that to the list here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. It was fun.
All right, Peter. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Take care. Remember to like and follow and subscribe.